It's not the question anymore whether to electrify your fleet, but how to overcome the obstacles.
120,000 chargers today, is a really, really commendable number given that 5 years ago it was 25,000 chargers.
2 million of electric vehicles on the road. We can turn them into batteries.
My house is powered by a Nissan Leaf as I'm speaking to you right now.
Hello and welcome to the Talk Auto podcast, where every month we welcome industry experts onto the podcast to talk about all things automotive. Now, in this month's episode, we have a topic which I find particularly interesting. We're going to be talking about how conversations around charging is changing from purely infrastructure based to a wider rollout and an energy opportunity. And as ever, I'm joined by two fantastic guests, so I'm delighted to welcome Sam Clarke, Head of eHGV at GRIDSERVE and also part of the EV Cafe, and Olga Spence, Strategy Manager at Cox Automotive Europe. How are you both?
Very well.
Great.
Excited to be on the podcast today. Interesting topic for us. Yeah, fantastic. Well, just before we dive in, do you want to just give us a really quick overview of your time in automotive, why you're on the podcast today? Sam, I know you've been in EVs for a very long time, so do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I'll try and keep it short then, really. But, EV driver for 23 years, I think. Used to own my own logistics company in central London for 10 years with a fully electric fleet. And then the last decade or so, I've been working at GRIDSERVE building out public charging infrastructure. So I've been involved in all walks of EV life, from two wheels all the way through to trucks now. And for my sins, I've got 4 Guinness World Records for EV driving as well. So. Done quite a lot in the industry.
We might have to talk a bit more about that on the podcast. I want to know what those four are. And Olga?
8 years in the automotive, all of them with Cox Automotive, part of the European strategy team. And in my role, I help our business and our customers navigate the change. And you can't think of a bigger change in the automotive right now than electrification. So really excited to dive into this topic.
Absolutely. I mean, if there's one thing that characterises the industry at the moment, it is change, isn't it? Especially when we're talking about electrification, and especially when we're talking about charging infrastructure and what that means for a wider commercial and consumer conversation. So the reason I say this is the topic which really interests me is because we had Nick Thomas from Shangan on episode 2, and he mentioned vehicle to grid charging, which just piqued my interest. So when this topic came up, I was very excited to talk about it. But I guess just to set the context, we are currently looking at, I think it's 120,000 chargers in the UK, with a target in 2030 of 300,000. So, we're quite a long way off that at the moment. We've got quite a big, shortfall to make up. But in saying that, the industry's kind of rallied together, haven't they? And they've really, accepted and embraced this need for charging infrastructure. So, Sam, as you say, you've been in the industry for a long time, and especially in EVs, which is rare for, as you say, 23 years, was it? So, given your experience, what do you view as the current state of charging infrastructure in the UK right now?
Well, it's definitely growing, and I think that the numbers you mentioned, Holly, at the beginning there, 120,000 chargers today, is a really, really commendable number given that 5 years ago it was 25,000 chargers. So we've come a long, long way in a short period of time. And the high-powered stuff was a few thousand 5 years ago, and now it's 25,000, I think, high-powered chargers across the UK. So I'm less fixated on that 300,000 number myself. I think that it's very evident that we're moving at a pace. And I'm more concerned about the right chargers, right place, right time than the actual end number. So I think what's really important is that we can see that growth, not necessarily be transfixed on trying to hit what might not be the right number at the end of the day anyway. It might be that 200,000 chargers is enough, providing they're placed in appropriate hubs around the country to support all the different types of vehicle use.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, that it's location-based as much as it is numbers-based, I was interested to hear, actually, there's loads of chargers in Scotland, actually, isn't there? Like a really good network in Scotland, which I was surprised at, but I guess you're driving much longer distances over there, aren't you? So you need those charging networks. But yeah, absolutely, it's definitely based on location. And I guess given this progress that you're talking about of, even in the past few years, it's grown by about 100,000 chargers. I guess there's been a bit of a discussion in the industry about what that means in terms of wider infrastructure and what that means in terms of developing that charging infrastructure. And is it about moving it or kind of embracing the commercial aspect as well as the consumer aspect? What do you think about that? Do you agree that that's the direction that we should be going in? Olga?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with Sam's point. It's all about the right charges at the right time, in the right place. And for commercial vehicles, it's even more important because it's all about uptime in the van world, in the fleet world. It's all about not spending too much time charging the vehicle. So when we're talking about rapid and ultra rapid charges, that currently around 23% of the all charge points that we've got in the UK. So it's not, back to Sam's point, it's not necessarily about the numbers, because when you look at the density in the urban areas, and London, for example, it's very dense. There's a lot of charges, but if you go more into the rural areas, Northern Ireland is a good example, not as many. So if we look at the overall picture, the progress is massive, but it's a lot more to do in the areas when the density is not that high.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess from a making it commercial perspective, what do you think? Do you think discussions are going towards, or the industry is going towards, having a really big network of commercial use chargers, or less so?
No, absolutely, it has to. I mean, I had a little look on the numbers last night. Around 42 million vehicles on the roads in the UK. About 5.5 million of those are vans and trucks. Mm-hmm. So, as a proportion, it's reasonably small from a vehicle count. But emissions-wise, that's nearly 40% of all emissions. So 13% of the total, but 40% of the emissions. So it's very evident that is a sector that, whilst it might be one of the smaller proportions, it has a huge impact, which needs to be resolved. And therefore, the smaller vans and the bigger vans and the trucks that we're putting into the road now as electrified options are really, really important, because that's going to make a really material difference to the overall emissions targets. So yeah, it has to be part of the mix, and it affects us all, right? That's one thing I'm always telling people, is that we're all getting packages delivered every day at our doorsteps. How does they get there? Well, they start somewhere in a depot with a lorry, and then probably another truck, and then a smaller van that delivers it to your door. All that stuff needs to be electrified, because we're all contributing to the movement of freight around the UK. So if we can do that, but do it emission-free, then we're winning. So it's an incredibly important part of the mix.
And we won't achieve decarbonization targets without these commercial vans. Yeah. Cars, vans, trucks. Back to a very good point, the 5 million vans on the road. 85% of the new van sales are diesel sales still. And we're way behind the ZEV mandate targets for vans, for example. So if we refer back to the numbers, in 2024, percentage of new van sales were expected to be, when the ZEV mandate got introduced, 10%. It went from 5.5% in 23 to 5.8%. So hardly moved. And it's still year to date, 2026, with 24% percentage of green vans to be as a percentage of the new van sales. We're still under 10%. So year to date, it's 9.5%. So we're far behind the targets, and the situation is completely different. I know we're behind in terms of the cars, but in terms of the vans, we're further behind. So it's definitely something that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely, and it's that commercial space where we're really going to see the change, isn't it? So, whether it's getting a package delivered or it's transportation or whatever it might be, from a fleet perspective as well, electrifying that and what that means for the charging network will be really interesting. Now, Sam, in your experience and kind of with what you're doing now in the industry, how do you think the industry is looking to address the challenge of commercialising EV charging and addressing that fleet issue as well?
Well, I think the general market recognises the need to do this, and in fact it's a differentiator for winning business now. So everyone recognises that they need to electrify where they can. It's not always easy, but the analysis we've done for many years in many different projects demonstrates that almost all fleets have an ability to electrify a proportion. That might just be 10% to begin with, but it's a start, and with that start is how you learn. And then you can start to push it further, which is what we're doing with the eHGV traffic as well at the moment. We've seen, my project that I've been running for 2-3 years now, we've put 161 44-tonne eHGV trucks on the road. That's quite a large proportion of the total in the UK right now. But what's really interesting is the data that it's showing. And what it's showing is that there's a definite and understandable conservative approach to using these vehicles. But then over time, the mileages keep creeping up. So people are gathering confidence in this new technology and then starting to push the trucks further. And all of that data, I think, is really, really valuable, because then it helps to showcase or show the rest of the industry that it can be done. And as I said, it will become a differentiator to winning business. So it's going to be really, really important that people make this step. It's not easy. There's a lot of complexity to it. It's not just about the vehicle anymore. And you might be lucky enough to have bunkered fuel at your depot, or you go to the local garage to refuel with diesel. Now these industries are needing to relearn. I was at a Logistics UK conference last week, speaking for the first time in a few years. And I got there in the morning, and all the conversation at the Logistics UK event was about AI, data, charging infrastructure, eHGVs, grid connections. None of those things were discussion points 4 or 5 years ago. None of them.
Yeah. So
the whole industry needs to change and needs to learn all these different affiliated markets in order to progress.
Absolutely. And I think, the fact that even those topics being mentioned, well, of course they're being mentioned. Actually, every conference I've gone to about automotive in the past, even I think 2 years, probably a lot of those have been brought up, but hopefully is indicative of that change. Now, I guess from a consumer point of view, having those commercial chargers in place, now fleets is one thing obviously, but whether it's, businesses that are putting charging facilities in their car parks for customers, for employees, etc., with this shift, do you think that can aid EV adoption? And I think that's probably accessibility of the chargers. You go to work every day. I can speak from actual experience, actually. I said on the podcast a few months ago that I was debating getting an EV, and I had it with Sarah, actually, Sarah Sloman. And I don't live in a house with a driveway. There were certain barriers to adoption, and my company have installed chargers, and that's where I charge. I could access that 5 days a week. I can just have it on charge. It's slow charger. It's very accessible. It's relatively cheap, not quite as cheap as home charging, mind you. But, I think from a consumer point of view, it's probably, I think it should be driving that adoption. What about you, Olga?
It adds to the total number of chargers. But if we come back to the fleet operators, some of the drivers of these vans, because when not necessarily got the driveway, and it's not necessarily that the van will go back to the depot to charge overnight. An ideal case scenario, it might be the case, but it might not be enough capacity in that depot for the driver to drop that van off overnight to charge. So that causes issues as well. So when we talk about commercial charging infrastructure and fleet operators, they do operate cars, they do operate vans. HGVs is a bit different stories, but they're using the same infrastructure that consumers do. So it would help, but going back to fleet operators, they need predictability. They need really to understand the cost of that charger, to plan the business. They run the business, and that's the biggest difference. If you look at the underlying challenges and questions that fleet operators ask about the whole transition to the EV, they are similar. You need to source the van or the vehicle, you need to charge the vehicle, maintain the vehicle. It's just the friction amplifies when it exists right now. So they feel these friction points much more than consumers do. So it will help, and we need to invest more in the alternative charging infrastructure. If depot charging is slow, complicated, expensive as well.
And from your perspective, Sam, I guess from a consumer point of view, do you think that this commercial angle will be useful for EV adoption?
Oh, it has to be, and an easy phrase to say is there's no silver bullet, but it's true that there are. If we can apply the right infrastructure, again, the right place, right time, whether that be at your place of work, or more high-powered hubs where they need to be, and get all of this spread across, then it's just going to help everybody. I've been working on eHGV for a few years, but it's actually commercial charging is the way that I see it, right? Because that's an opportunity to put quite a few different types of vehicle, the vans that Olga speaks of, and things that are being towed and other stuff. How do we get as many things charging in as many appropriate places as possible? And So the big numbers is all well and good, but it's underneath that. We're going to try and work out if we've put the right application in the right place for everyone, for as many people as possible to be able to use it. And it is a challenge that I think it's about half of the general public don't have access to a driveway, and there is a differentiation or a disparity between home charging and your workplace charging and the public domain. So that we've got to find a way of bridging that gap a bit, because those that are not privileged enough to have a driveway have the joy of higher prices as a result. Because they're having to use the more expensive infrastructure. So we've got to find a way of bridging that gap somehow, and certainly neutralising VAT would be one good way of doing that. So 5% at home, but you pay 20% if you're charging a public depot, which is a public site. So those sort of disparities and trying to level that would be a huge help.
Absolutely. I think I found it a lot easier as an EV driver who doesn't have a driveway to have those chargers at work. And I actually don't really charge anywhere else unless I'm going on a long journey, ever. I have access to that charger 5 days a week, and yeah, it's brilliant. So yeah, I'm a very big proponent of it.
But that's a big difference between consumer use of vehicles and fleet use of vehicles, because fleet operators sweat their assets. If the wheels are not turning, the vehicles are not earning. So it's all about making the most of the vehicle. So that's why the rapid chargers and the charging overnight is so beneficial for fleet operators, because if the vehicle is not on the road, if the driver is not on the road, it's a massive losses for the fleet operators. They use their vehicles a lot. That's why they need the predictability. And fleet electrification is already happening. As Sam mentioned, there's a certain percentage of, it's not the question anymore whether to electrify your fleet, but how to overcome the obstacles, how and when. And some fleet operators see a lot of benefits because of their operating models. For example, if it's delivery truck that operate in the specific area, they know their delivery drop-offs, they can plan the route. It really works for them. And if the range is right, they can plan around charging their delivery trucks overnight in the depot hub. The question is, do they have, as the fleet grows, as the scale, do they have enough capacity? Do they have enough infrastructure at their depots to charge those trucks? And that's a big issue that the industry is facing right now. And that's what's been understood. And government is listening, and we've seen the recent measures put in place to address some of these issues, which is a good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, Sam, it's a lot more in your world, this, isn't it? Kind of the fleet and the eHGV side of it as well. Now, obviously, we know that there's some consideration of different fuel types for eHGVs. I know they're a little bit different, but focusing on electric, kind of where does this discussion lead for that industry?
Where does it lead? Hopefully it leads to the majority of trucks being electrified in the UK, by 2040. We've just got to find the right mechanisms by which to do that. And the project I've been running now for 3 years is a mechanism, Innovate UK funded mechanism, to help be a catalyst for change in that particular market that otherwise probably wouldn't have had the stimulus to get going. So the government, in fairness, has put a reasonable amount of money behind trying to help with that total cost of ownership modelling for the initial fleets that are willing to make that commitment, so that they're by and large on cost parity on a running total cost of ownership model to the diesel counterparts, which takes away one of the commercial financial worries or headaches of taking that leap. And as I said before, my hope is that 160 vehicles odd from us, about 1,000 eHGVs in the UK, that's just it's less than 1% of the total, right? So it's tiny.
But it generates
but it's a start.
from 18 to 20% of all road side emissions.
Exactly. So if those first 1,000 vehicles can help showcase what the other 599,000 need to do, then we're on the journey of starting somewhere. And that's, with a lot of these things, just got to get going. Yeah. I was thinking back to what Olga was saying a minute ago. My logistics company I used to own, I had 120 electric vans in central London, and they were all charged on 3-pin plugs on the walls of my arches in central London.
No way.
I had nowhere near enough power to charge all the vehicles every day, but we just got clever with clock timers on the walls and balanced it all out, and it was the dumbest smart charging solution ever known, but it worked, and that's the evolution. And I'm not suggesting everyone goes and plugs into 3-pin sockets on the wall anymore. That era is gone. But the principle of being smart about what you do with your energy and smart with the way you operate your vehicles will be a difference to what's today in the diesel world. But it works. It will work. You just got to think outside the box a little bit. So all these initiatives and all these directives and fiscal incentives, I'm confident will make a difference in the long term. It will help push people along on this journey, and then more people join as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when we talk about this kind of these commercial chargers, are there any examples of companies that you can think that have been doing it really well recently, like electrified fleets or anything that you think is a really good example of this shift?
IKEA is a good one. I think the global fleet 60% are electrified, and they invested millions into their charging infrastructure, including in the UK as well. A lot of businesses got decarbonization targets that are quite ambitious, and they do see the value of these vehicles, they do see the economics working for them. But because of the recent challenges, it's still more expensive. Upfront cost is still more expensive because total cost of ownership, insurance, all other challenges are stopping them. It's not just infrastructure. Infrastructure is the common theme that we hear from the fleet operators, is still one of the biggest constraints. But there are other constraints, for example, the accessibility of the vehicles. For fleet operators, they know how many miles they do a day, they know what the vehicle needs to be doing, and if it's performance less than the diesel or petrol alternative, it's just not good enough. So the availability of cars, we've got about 160 different EVs on the market. With the vans, for example, more than half of them got plugs in it. But for some fleets, like utilities, local authority, they're specific kind of vehicles that they use. So not every manufacturer can provide to them that type of vehicle. So that's a massive constraint. We hear a lot 4x4 heavy duty truck, for example, in green version, not available, and the fleet operators working directly with the manufacturers. But unless there is a pipeline of the orders, manufacturers not necessarily gonna jump on it and create a vehicle and specifically for those needs. So there's a lot of obstacles right now to scaling. So a lot of the companies, they trialing, especially eHGVs, like Amazon. In the recent news, ordered 160 of those trucks. And it's interesting that you mentioned 160 because overall, I think it's less than 600 eHGVs registered in a year in the UK. So it's a massive proportion. If you look at the year-to-year growth, it's like 170%. But actually, it's just a very small amount. Yeah. It's really in its infancy. It's exciting. It's going to make a massive difference. But we are, if you compare where we are with the cars and where we are with the trucks, it's a completely different stage of life of the adoption of this vehicle. It's almost, you can do the parallel with the first adopters of the electric cars, the same of the fleets who adopted electric vans. A lot of them are almost like that. They're excited about making the difference in terms of the green energy, heating decarbonization standards early, but they also got facilities and money to invest into those, so they spent millions. It's not as accessible to smaller fleet operators, for example. As Sam mentioned his example, I've got I've spoken recently to a driver for local electrical wholesale distributor, and I was asking him how many vans you've got in your company, and he was saying 2. But and it's plugged in, 2 plugged in, and we've got like 40 diesel vans. And so that's the reality. They're just only starting and ramping up, and they see all these obstacles, and they're figuring out, like Sam mentioned, being kind of trying clever, being smart, trying not to spend, millions when they can't afford it, because they're the businesses. It needs to work for them in terms of their economics as well.
Yeah, I think one good example I can give you, Holly, is from my consortium is Nissan. So we put some chargers in the factory, right smack bang in the middle of the factory in one of their plots up in Sunderland. And that's being used not by them, but by 3 of their contractors. So one of them One of them is moving actual vehicles around. The other one is moving parts locally, and the other one's moving parts nationally. So there's 3 contractors within that plant that are using eHGVs and the charging infrastructure on the daily basis, and just showing that it can be done, both locally moving awkward things like vehicles, and then also doing the long distance up and down the country. So, and the project's got a good few examples of that. United Utilities, a waste company, so that's moving a lot of waste. It's heavy, it's wet, it's difficult, but they're managing it, they're doing it, they're making it happen. And Royal Mail and Amazon, Olga mentioned, etc. We've got all of those in our consortium, all doing different things, but with the same technology, which I think is encouraging to see that it's not niche in that respect. These vehicles can be applied in a multitude of different ways.
Yeah, we're definitely getting there with proving that it works. And I think that's probably, as you say, from a consumer perspective, for the cars, we've got that. We know it works. But now we need to move that to the commercial and the eHGV space, which you are doing, Sam. We're getting there with it.
Yeah.
Now, Sam, earlier you mentioned smart charging.
Yes.
And it's something that I want to touch on, which is, smart charging and vehicle to grid charging as well. Just before we dive into those, Olga, do you want to just quickly give us an overview of both of those terms, just for those who may not be familiar?
Yeah, of course. So vehicle to grid, it's an exciting technology that allows electric vehicles not just charge from the grid, but also feed the energy already stored in the battery of the car back into the grid. So pretty much turning your EV into mobile battery. So first question, why would the grid need the energy from your EVs? It's first of all, the grid is becoming increasingly renewable, and with fuel, with a fuel plant, you can turn it on, turn it off, almost manage the supply based on the demand. As we've got increasingly renewable energy, the wind blows and then the wind doesn't blow, sun's shining and then it doesn't. So we need to tweak the demand in order to support the supply. So you pretty much use the energy stored in your electric vehicle battery to support the grid. So you take some risks with that, as you can imagine, but then you get the rewards from it as well. So either you can get discounts on the energy that you feed into your EV, or you can get money back. So that's the whole point of it. So it's quite early. It's not science fiction. It's already used, it's already implemented in the UK, but more like a couple of thousand people doing it right now. The big obstacle to that is compatibility. Is your car got the technical capabilities to do that? And if you go on Octopus website, I think there's only 3 models listed there right now, which is Nissan Leaf, who actually pioneered this technology in terms of the commercial adoption back quite a few years ago. Then you've got Mitsubishi Outlander, actually. And another one, I don't remember which one.
Minimal.
I can't remember either.
Yeah, racking our brains.
So just three models right now. So that's a big barrier, that's a big limitation, but the idea is great.
Yeah.
We've got 2 million of electric vehicles on the road. We can turn them into batteries, and that can support the grid, not just with balancing the grid, but also putting less copper on the ground. And also grid would not have to, in theory, have that many stationary batteries, grid level batteries as well. So it's something that we're actually, as a country, pioneering. There's something that's been tested in Europe, in Norway, smart charging. Smart charging is something different, and not to confuse two things. Smart charging is when you plug in and benefit with cheaper rates when it's aligned with the grid. So, for example, right now, a lot of people plug in off-peak and 1 o'clock in the morning and get the cheap energy because everybody else is sleeping, and between 4 and 8 o'clock, that's where the peak is. Again, as the energy becoming more renewable, this peak is going to vary quite significantly. So if you've got the ability to plug in your car for 12 hours or less, then you can really benefit from smart charging. And in the future, vehicle to grid is something that, if we're able to scale it, is something could be a game changing to the whole grid infrastructure.
I'll give a couple of real world examples of it.
Oh, always, please.
So on the commercial side, about how long, it's going to be longer than I dare to think, but 7 or 8 years ago now, when I ran my logistics company, I had 7 vehicle to grid chargers in the depot, the biggest network in the country at the time, and that was a Nissan ENV200 van, so the equivalent of the Leaf, but a van version. So vehicle to grid is one thing, but vehicle to X is the sort of phraseology which covers anything from the vehicle and energy back somewhere. So in my case, it was vehicle to B, vehicle to building. So those vans were powering the building every night, but also charging back up again using smart technology in terms of the timing, so they were ready to go the next morning. So we powered the building off the vans every night and still charged them before the next duty cycle in the morning. And that again was many years ago now, but it was working and just demonstrates that it can be done. And then on a personal level, I have a Nissan Leaf. It's plugged in at home right now, and it's powering my house. So that Leaf powers my house all day long, covers all of my electricity needs, and then recharges itself in the middle of the night, as Olga mentioned. So I have a peak and off-peak tariff, but I only ever consume off-peak energy 24 hours a day because the car is doing all the heavy lifting. Whenever I turn the kettle on or anything like that, the Leaf is what kicks in and becomes a mobile battery and a vehicle. And if we're all doing that sort of stuff in the future, that's going to make a tremendous difference to our energy needs, our energy mapping. And so it's exciting technology, which is not something in the future, because I did it commercially many years ago, and my house is powered by a Nissan Leaf as I'm speaking to you right now. Yeah. So this stuff is real world, but there are a lot of vehicles on the AC side rather than the DC side of the electrics that are coming through now. So the vehicle to grid technology in that space will become a lot more prevalent over the next few years, with more and more manufacturers including it within the construct of the vehicle.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually explaining vehicle to X to somebody recently, and they said, surely that's not got enough electricity to power a house.
That's what I was thinking.
And so I did some Googling. More than enough, isn't it?
Yeah, several days, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, very accessible and not, as you say, not futuristic at all. It's happening now, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, we touched on... well, you gave a fantastic example of your previous business and how smart charging has benefited you there. But I guess for wider businesses, drivers and fleets, how do you think smart charging will benefit those people?
Shall I go? I think one of the key things is that one of the challenges in the industry is always grid capability, whether that be putting big public sites like GRIDSERVE does into the ground across the country, or at depot level. One of the constraints is the grid, whether you have it, whether it's available, how far away it might be to reach, what it might cost, and the time frame by which you can do it. And these are all additional costs to running your own business. So that's one of the constraints that is very evident in the marketplace. However, being intelligent in the way that you manage your energy means that those concerns might be mitigated a little bit by the smartness of the technology, which enables more people, whether that be a vehicle to grid charger at home or a depot like mine that had 50, 60 vehicles in each one of the sheds. Being smart with the energy means that those grid constraints would be less.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that all of these elements are part of the collective, because that means that people don't need to be quite so horrified about potential high cost of grid connections and grid infrastructure if there's smart ways of being able to mitigate that. And we had, in my depot, for example, we had lifts and shutter doors. Now, they were big things that needed power, but only for very short periods of time. So if you look at the maths as in a linear fashion, then we couldn't have any vehicle charging because we need to park that energy for the lift to go up and down. But if you get smart about it, then every time the lift went up, the charging momentarily dipped on the vehicles. So the lift could function, and then when it was done, the charging went back up again. So that meant that we didn't need anywhere near as enough of a grid connection by just being smart with the way in which we use the energy. So there's more of that is developed, then we'll be all right.
Yeah.
I agree with that, but I was thinking it adds so much more complexity as well. And with the technology, with the smart technology that supports the smart charging, the future is definitely using the technology to help you utilize the smart charging to reduce your costs as a fleet operator. Because if you look at the fleet operators, what was before electrification? You just pay at the pump for fuel. Your fuel cost, your mileage, fuel cost is quite predictable. Of course, there's macroeconomic conditions. They can go down, go up and down. But now it's a challenge, but it's also a massive opportunity for fleets as well, because you can significantly not just become greener and hit your decarbonization targets, which are very important, but you can also significantly decrease your costs, and economics would work in your favor, and decrease your reliance on fossil fuels as well, that currently very fluctuate a lot because of the macroeconomic conditions.
Exactly. The pricing at the moment is, a lot of people struggling with it, whether that be fleet operators or consumers, drivers in general. So I think, it's a really interesting way to kind of explore what the options are for the future. Now, going back to EV adoption, we've discussed, how expanding the charging infrastructure, having commercial chargers, etc., might help that. How do you think that this will kind of help the EV industry as a whole? So whether that be a consumer, fleet, business, or everything, how do you think that's going to affect, and how are these advancements in charging going to affect the automotive industry and EV industry?
That's a broad question. I think on the one hand, it's interesting that this market is still nascent, and there are a lot of players in it from different walks of life, whether it be Cox Automotive or a utility company or an OEM, that we're all moving into this sort of electrification space from different angles. And I think what's quite interesting is that it's how it all sort of settles down over time, and because there are so many different elements to the marketplace now that we've discussed already. And I think there's a huge amount of learning we can get out of that. And it's going to evolve. It's going to keep evolving. All the technology we talked about today, I think it's all really exciting stuff. And it will ultimately just help everybody advance more quickly once we share all of this learning across a wider mix. But it's interesting to me that so many different industries are coming in to this sort of new space, really, with new ideas. So I think we'll see quite a lot of change over the next few years as a result of that.
Definitely, I completely agree, and it also becomes such an integral part of all automotive businesses as we transition fleets to electrified fleet. It's probably not something that fleet managers would think about back 15, 20 years ago. But now it's a real part of their life, knowing where to routing and planning around where to charge vehicles, what's their costs and what their processes look like. Because if you think about it, sometimes they have to rethink the whole operational process around that, because now the routes, you need to think about charging the vehicle, you need to think about how do you charge it smartly so to benefit from the cost savings. It's changing the whole landscape. Every automotive business, starting from dealer to manufacturer, it's affected by it, and a lot of the change for the good, both in terms of the environment and for the cost operating model. It's expensive to begin with, but then it pays off eventually and become part of normal. And with all the future exciting technology, I don't think it's going to be one or the other. We've heard about battery swaps, for example, technology, vehicle to grid, smart charging. In the future, the software, the technology will just be guiding the fleet operators what to use, when to get the energy from the grid, when to feed it back in, when to use stationary battery, when to use all the mobile batteries, when to do the battery swap. So it's the amount of innovation happening in the industry is enormous. Is absolutely enormous. And if we think it's not just the decarbonization targets that we've got in automotive industry, quite ambitious, we also got renewable grid targets as well. So on the grid side is happening a lot already, and the automotive side is happening a lot. Therefore, collaboration and the really rising innovation and new technologies that we're observing right now, that's what's happening. That's what's really exciting.
I was going to say, it's very, very exciting. Now, I guess the last question before I let you guys go would be, what is one takeaway that our listeners could have, or what would you recommend? What do you want them to take away from this episode if you were just to pick just one thing? I think we've discussed a lot of, I would say, really interesting things about the future of electrification and the future of infrastructure, actually. So one thing that you think our listeners should take away from this?
If I could think of one thing the listeners could take away, it would be, of all the things we discussed, if there's anything in there that relates to you or your ambitions, whether that just be being an EV driver or you're a fleet operator, just do it. Like, just start the journey. If you're not sure, then dip your toe in, trial some vehicles, drive some vehicles, learn from some of the stuff maybe that we've talked about and the rest of the series shares in terms of the stuff that we're learning in this industry, and use that to test. Because once you get going, it gets exciting, it gets interesting, it gets challenging, it gets, all these things start to become impassioned in people because they love the journey. And so yeah, I think it would be whatever it is that's in here that is of interest to you, go off and do it yourself and see how you get on, and you'll enjoy the journey.
Very inspirational. And you, Olga?
Yeah, I'd say see this as an opportunity, and the next stage, the future of electrification. It's not about just the vehicle and changing the vehicle from ICE to electric. It's about integrating the vehicles into energy system and operating your fleet and energy system as a whole holistic process to get the maximum benefit out of it.
Amazing. Both two great points, and I do think we've covered some really interesting stuff today. So thank you very much, both of you, for joining. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Yep.
And we're going to catch up about your Guinness World Records after. So thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Ali.
Thank you very much for watching this episode of Talk Auto. We have, as ever, an email in our show notes if you'd like to get in touch to be on the podcast or recommend a topic. As ever, you can follow us on all our social media channels or on YouTube. And remember to like, follow and subscribe. And I'll see you next month for another episode of Talk Auto.